you considered the messages your outfits send? What do you think your clothes say about you? See, style is about the clothes, but it's not really about the clothes. Every day you make choices about what you're going to wear, but what are you communicating? Welcome to Above and Beyond Style. I'm your host, Maria DiLorenzo, and in 2019, I founded MFD Style, where I provide a unique, intuitive approach to personal styling for those ready to embrace a more meaningful look. With this podcast, I'll uncover key elements of where spirituality, psychology, and style intersect, revealing how you can make intentional wardrobe choices that reflect who you really are. So let me ask you, are you ready to transform into your authentic self? Then it's time. Come with me on this journey, and together, we'll take your style above and beyond style. Hey everybody, welcome back to Above and Beyond Style. Again, this is season 4, and we are talking all about change. All the waves of change, how to ride the waves of change, and learning all these lessons through this great lens of the metaphor of surfing. And it's been so fun to have my conversation partner this season, Dr. Melissa Carrick. So Missy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It is so great to be here, and always a pleasure and a privilege to really share this conversation with you, especially as we both navigate these waves of change in our life. So I thought that we could just recap a little bit of the question of where we left off and define a little bit of what that wave is. So we left off with this question of how can we ride the waves that are in our life, and that those waves are going to keep coming. So if we look at what are those waves, we have the big waves and we have the little waves. But a wave really is any opportunity or situation or circumstance that life presents us. And knowing that those waves are going to be there, the question then is, where can we choose to invite or to embrace the wave? And really, what is our stance with that wave when it comes to us? Are we going to brace for it? Are we going to embrace it? Are we going to tap out and say, you know what? This wave is not for me, or not right now, or I'm going to hit pause and just take a minute, refresh. How are we going to navigate that wave, however it's showing up? And maybe even more importantly, we touched on this, Maria, of how can we really bring more of ourselves to the world and choose through our response to that wave rather than reaction. Through our response, how can we express a little bit more of ourselves and have a little bit more of ourselves showing up in the world?
Yeah, and I love that because it really does speak to that word about opportunity, because in many ways, and we talked a little bit about this on a previous episode about like, you can look at that wave with the doom and gloom and the daunting nature of like, oh no, what is coming? What is ahead of me? Or you have the opportunity to reframe that in a way that's like, okay, this wave is in front of me. I get a choice to jump in and let's see what happens and let's ride this. And maybe there'll be some discovery in that process of riding it that will give you new information or a new way to bring yourself forward that hadn't happened previously. And so I love that it's sort of this window into the opportunity or this situation, or there's something there for you, that it's not against you, but it's actually for you. And so that way of helping us know that the waves are going to come, whether we see them or not, we want them or not, the waves are a real part of the human experience. And so if we have the opportunity to look at it as such, then I think there is more for our true self to kind of come out of that and say yes, and say, okay, I'm on board with this. I'm ready to bring forward what needs to be brought forward by entering into this change or this opportunity for riding the wave. And for many of us, I think that I loved your position on, are you bracing this or are you embracing this? Bracing for it, like you're like, no, thank you. Or are you really in that receptive space for like, okay, I'm going to embrace this and I'm going to take it in and I'm going to see how this could really, grow and benefit me. And these are the questions that for all of us, I hope you can pause for a minute and think about, like, what's your wave? What's coming either at you, seen or unseen? where there's opportunity for that best self or that authentic self to come forward. And I, in many ways, pose that question to my clients all the time about their style and want them to reflect on that honestly and openly with me, because if we're going to get anywhere, it's going to have to be through that exploration of like, are you going to say yes and step into this or resist it?
Thinking about what that yes looks like for each of us. And I've said for me, there's like the whisper and the whisper, and the whisper kept getting louder and kept coming around each corner or in different ways in different areas of my life. And so the yes looked different. It was a slower yes. It was an evolving yes. But where do we say yes along each step of the way?
And how do you know the yes is calling you forward to take action, or to do an active step toward change? And I think when I've posed that question to you previously, you've talked about that whisper. It got a little louder and a little louder, and there was the physical body sweating, and there's a lot of different sort of manifestations of, ooh, I got to do something about this. And I wonder for all of us, like, do we all have something in that where we can resonate with this? Like, how did I know it was time that I need to ride this wave?
As a surfer, quite literally, if I were to think literally, it's almost this feeling in your, I wonder if it's different for every person, but there's almost a center or your hora, for me, it's almost a solar plexus area of like, this is the wave for me. And it's this like, yes. And it's a moment of simultaneous, maybe a little bit of fear, courage, and this excitement, or in the language of emotions within Chinese medicine, the language of the heart or the pericardium is really frightfully overjoyed, which is such a beautiful word, right? So frightfully overjoyed is the emotion of like, oh my gosh, oh. It's like hearing the click, click, click of a roller coaster as it goes up, up, up and ascends before it's getting ready to plunge down and take you on the loop. So that frightfully overjoyed feeling, and it's right for me in the center of my solar plexus. I think for some people it's in other parts of the body, but that's one of my, yes, this is the wave for me, unless it's all these small little waves, and then I just know and I take them all almost indiscriminately. But when I think back on the history of my life, I've made some big choices and said yes, and in some ways saying yes was saying no to something else. So as I think we talked about, Maria, I was in divinity school at one point, and I got the message that it was time for me to change and go become a scientist and go to chiropractic school. And I wound up graduating a year early, changing my program to a Master's of Theological Studies. The process of doing that, it was interesting. It took some observing and some being present in my life. And I've heard you talk about looking for the signs. And so some of the signs, including on my, Get a Job Friday, when I was doing my ministry, I was supposed to be doing my ministry applications, I spent all day at the chiropractor. And then it was, hearing this little buzzword drop in of, we nurture what nurtures us. Oh, wait a second, what has nurtured me? And having a pause to ask the question of, and why did I hear that so loudly? And I think we all do that. We were talking about sometimes when you hear the same name or you see the same sign showing up all the time, the same literally like street sign. What is this? Why am I noticing this? So having that curiosity.
Yeah, love. I mean, if anybody is a follower of signs, I believe there's a book, her name is, I believe it's Laura Lynn Jackson, who wrote this book, Signs, and it's all about learning to interpret signs in the natural order. And it's a really fascinating read about, like you've just said, like if you're seeing a certain number sequence, or if you're seeing a feather or something in the world that's kind of repeating itself to you time and time again, there's often significance to that. And it's up to you to interpret, what does that mean? What are you either thinking about when you saw that sign, or how does it make you feel when you saw that sign? And starting to kind of like in a puzzle, like piece together this little breadcrumbs of like, well, I saw that when I was here, and I was doing this when I saw that, and wow, that's all related to this. And so you're kind of putting together your clues to interpret and understand what was the sign pointing to. And it can be different for every person. We might be seeing the same thing, but we're interpreting it in new ways. And I think that's one of the really beautiful parts about kind of responding to the invitation for change, or looking at these waves and saying, okay, am I going to walk in or walk out? Oftentimes there's other information that can come in that can help inform us, but also move us to action when we may not know, like, should I take this step? I don't know, but I keep seeing this thing and I wonder if this has an association with what I'm up to. And I think that's helpful to have some of those signs to point to and to start to see. Then I'm a firm believer that once you start kind of receptive to the signs, more signs are then presented to you, because it's like the natural order in the spiritual world is like, okay, she's open for business and is ready to communicate and understand what we're putting out to her. So if you follow that, or if that inspires you in some way, I encourage you to pay attention to the signs because they're out there and they have a lot of meaning, and they can often help be guideposts along the way for this stuff.
And, this also, it's interesting because this happens in everyday life, and it may sound glamorous, or like we're sitting around and just kind of gazing at our navels. And of course, I'm doing my 3-hour journal session, not doing that. My life does not have 3-hour journal sessions at all. And not even a daily journal. Like, that's something that I would desire for my life, but it doesn't always happen. So in real life, in real time, it's just starting to notice. And I think it's where we have the time to pause and say, oh, whoa. Or as you were talking, I was thinking lyrics sometimes get in my head and over. And when it's that earworm and I go to sleep thinking about it and I wake up thinking about it, I start to pay attention.
That's right.
What is that lyric telling me? Or why did I remember that snippet of that poem? That just stays with me. Why is that with me? And looking at it going, okay, what's the message?
Right.
And what's the message of life? And it helps to have conversation partners, for sure, to reflect the signs back at us. But we can do that in a moment. So I'm curious for you, those signs.
Yeah, it's funny when I really reflect on this over time. It was a lot of different things that were kind of adding up to the larger effort or the larger change that I would make. And I'm speaking to the fact that I sold my home and I am a wanderer, if you will, living my life kind of in this interim space until I've really discovered kind of where my next place will be. And it's obviously more than my physical surroundings. It's always been about, how do I cultivate and really live a vibrant life? And I'll tell you what ended up happening. The biggest quote unquote sign for me was, I'm a pretty extroverted person. I think the older I get, the more introverted I become and the more comfortable I become being with myself and being alone and needing that kind of spaciousness and time for myself. But for the most part, I really gain energy from being around other people. And I noticed, now this was pre-COVID, but I think it was definitely highlighted and exasperated and built through COVID, that I became much more insular. And I saw myself starting to withdraw, and not in a depressive way, but just withdraw and sort of like do my own thing, live my life. And I got to a point very candidly where weekends would be, I'd essentially dread them, because there would be such long, expansive periods of time where I didn't have plans, or I wasn't connecting with people, or there wasn't anything on the agenda. And I thought, how am I going to fill my time? And so it got to be more and more of this kind of separation from what I would have called a pretty active life to this sort of inactivity and this lack of vibrancy that all of a sudden just sort of hit me and was like, wait a second here. I don't know really what happened. It was very much gradually over time. But I got a really clear sign about this that I speak about in humor now, but at the time it was a little bit I'll be honest, it was difficult. I lived in a condo complex and it was like a townhouse. So I shared a wall with my neighbor, my immediate neighbor. So we were like mirror images of our units, were mirror images of one another. And I had the same neighbor for like basically the entire time I'd lived there. And they decided last summer, 2 summers ago, to move. They had rented this space and they were moving back to the Midwest where they originally were from. So they moved, and the unit then was put for sale on the market. So I got a new neighbor. And this neighbor, to be truthful, was really disruptive. And it was really difficult because it was noise, it was volume, it was like a lot of disruption. And it created so much, it was such a pain point for me. And it was as if the universe was like, we're going to throw this really disruptive person in your path so that you will take a hard look at how this home and this lifestyle is not right for you. And to be candid, if they hadn't moved in and created probably so much disruption for me, I'm not sure I would have taken the step to actually put my house on the market. And now looking back, I can say, yeah, that they were very purposeful in my story. And I was highly annoyed and very frustrated. And my poor family was like, when are you going to do something about this neighbor? Because like you complain about them all the time. And I had to make a choice. And so it was more than, of course, just a noisy neighbor, right? But it was symptomatic of this larger realization that my life had lost this vibrancy that I had needed. And that really moved me to action. Like, I had to do something about this.
Isn't it interesting that pain is such a, it's that's often how we're moved. I love the writer Flannery O'Connor and her whole thematic of the violence of grace. And so it's not all rainbows and butterflies and signs. I saw 444 on the clock and I happened to look right over at 444:44 and I knew what that meant. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes God, spirit, the universe, whatever we want to call the thing that is greater than us that makes the waves.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's that way and sometimes it's not. And I appreciate you saying that because in my own journey or our own journey of selling our house, and we're still in that process, we sold the house. So there have been some early tremors. And the early tremors, there have been a number of things. I live in the city. But one of the things that really made us turn the corner in selling our house was that during the COVID era, when everyone was working from home, on 2:00 on a Tuesday, our front door was kicked in and fully kicked down. Our neighbors heard it. I was actually at work, but all our neighbors were working from home. They heard it and came running around the corner and chased two guys out of our house as they vaulted over the front steps. And our neighbors, God bless them, including one who's 70, chased them down the street. So I have these beautiful neighbors, couldn't get them. My husband came running home from the office because he got the alert about our alarm because our house had been broken into before. And it doesn't look fancy from the outside. It's not like their stuff. It's just what happened. So that was definitely a sign, including the fact that the police couldn't get there until 9 p.m. And then we lived for 10 to 12 weeks with 2x4s on the inside across our front door. But 2 weeks later, I'm going to laugh as I say this, as I speak this out loud. There literally was a city pipe sewage backup into our basement, and there was brown water all over our basement right before we were leaving town, like literally the night before. We were getting on an early morning flight. So there were those two sequential things, and there were definitely a number of other pieces after that. And certainly that message and those signs get louder. And like yourself, my family going, hey, the old proverb or the old story of, God sending you a rowboat, then there's another one, then there's the helicopter, then there's the plane sending down the ladder for you to climb up. When are you going to get the message? And we sold our house and we're still working out. Okay, we still live in the city. We actually moved right across the street from our house into a rental, which we've called the launch pad. So knowing we're still in that process of launching. So it's interesting that these waves of change, it's not always easy when you're riding. You don't always make the first wave. You don't always land it. It's not always a glory ride. Totally. Sometimes it's sloppy, it's messy, and it's, okay, I'm just going to keep going, all right, well, I'm out here. I'm still paddling. I'm still going to paddle for that wave. I don't really know which way it's coming from, or it may seem like it's a hurricane.
Right. But your point is well taken about the pain point. And I hate that part of humanity. It's hard for me sometimes to qualify it this way, that like, why do we have to be pushed to pain before we, I don't know, move to action or really reevaluate something? And it's just true. I mean, I'm not going to hide behind that it was not the factor that pushed me to action, but it was a major factor, right? It became uncomfortable enough for me to stay where I was living and to really look then more comprehensively at my life in this particular home. And I'll tell you the other sign that was really funny for me. As I mentioned, like, I'm a pretty social person. I like to believe that I get to know people easily. I had lived in this complex for about 5 years, and I basically didn't know anybody's name. And I just like didn't really, I mean, I waved at people because a lot of dog owners were out walking their dog, and you kind of wave to people, but like, I never stopped to say, hi, I'm Maria. Who are you? Right? Like, where do you live? And that should have been a really early sign that this home or this location wasn't quite right. And I kind of knew that from the moment I bought it back in 2017, that it was going to be my launching pad. It wasn't going to be my forever home. I didn't know how long I'd be there, but it gave me, it was a beautiful home. I'm so grateful I lived there, but I can now very clearly see it was very much a part of my path to get me to where I am this moment, because I needed that discomfort of being kind of in this isolated, quiet. It was really quiet. Some days I loved that, but some days it was like painfully quiet, and you sort of feel like, is there anybody out there, like, and thinking this like void was like, is it the apocalypse? And then of course then the world shuts down, and you're living in the pandemic of isolation, and it was very much exacerbated for a lot of people, so I know I'm not alone in that. But I can remember feeling like, whew, okay, these signs are getting louder and bigger, and I can continue to live here. I probably would be moderately happy, and you learn to have a certain threshold for like how much you can tolerate. And, would you get to just kind of, manage the noise or deal with the noisy neighbor or the whatever? Yeah, everybody does that. Like, everybody has a certain like, oh, I'll just deal with it. But I do have to wonder about how much of that really then starts to kind of strip away at your spirit. And if you are able to step in and say, wait a second, I don't have to keep dealing with it. I could actually do something that might change the trajectory and have this live and look and feel really good and different. But I'm going to have to take a pretty big step here. And I mean, for me, putting my house on the market and getting it sold within a couple weeks, and then choosing to move then a few months later, was sort of like, okay, I'm doing it. The wave is coming.
The wave is coming. And choosing to embrace that risk. And just like the signs, and when you are open and receptive to the signs, you take that one step, and it seems that the universe would reward that action step.
Maybe.
And going, okay, maybe. We don't yet know, either one of us.
I think we like to logically believe that it will. But
logically, but I would say it also makes heart sense, because instead of just going, okay, well, I'll tolerate this, we're actually stepping back into our own agency. And there is that feeling from the inside out of agency when you're making a choice. And then we stop living from the pain point, because we've taken action out of the pain point, and we're taking a step towards the life that we want. And that's worth way more to take one step in the direction of your dream, or even your possible dream if you don't know what that is. It's pulling, that's a step towards the life that is going to be pulling you forward, rather than the pain that you're pushing away.
Oh, and okay, we got to talk style now that you've just said it this way, because that is exactly what gets people to call me. I mean it. Like, they get to this point where the one little step, and I'm not minimizing the step, it's actually quite big, but the step that they took was to do this like exploratory call with me, because they've had this pain point of, My clothes are not working. I don't like how I feel in my clothes. I have a closet full of stuff I don't wear. I don't even know where to begin. It takes me forever to get dressed. I never feel good in my stuff. So there's lots of little pain points, right? That start to accumulate and get, kind of ride. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, so I know a girl and she can help you, and you got to just have a phone call with her and see if this might help. And I would say 99% of every new client intake call has to do with some version of what you've just described. And for everyone, we get to a threshold where it's like, I can't do this anymore. And sometimes that threshold can be a really long time, years and years and years of figuring out, am I getting there yet? Am I at the threshold yet? And for some people that happens quicker. So there's no judgment in however long it takes you to get to that point. But I would say that is exactly what gets people in my door, because they've realized this is something they can't, quote unquote, manage on their own. They need some help, right? And they are done with whatever the circumstance or the feeling or the situation is. They need to change and move on one side or the other of it. And so if I can get invited into the conversation to be like, can you help me with that? Can you help me figure out how to fill in the blank? That's my whole business model.
Yeah. Which is really about resonance, and that people recognize, whether it's style or whether it's a particular morning beverage or their diet or whatever it is, their location, that they're no longer resonant with that. And they may not know into what or into whom they're evolving, but knowing that there is something and that it's time to close the door, or at least move on from or evolve in that way.
That's right.
So reaching out or taking that one step towards embracing whatever the next evolution or the next iteration is. And they're not going to arrive there automatically.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel it was a gift when you partly named my style for me, because it gave me something almost like a little chip or a little picture to hold up to be like, okay, is this rock and roll? Is this rock and roll? Does this have any sparkles in it? Ooh, my neon sandals, I like those. Those have a little element of rock and roll.
Yeah. And I think every time someone gets to really, then that resonance gets louder and there's more joy connected to it, and there's excitement and energy. I mean, I don't know the physiology of what's happening in the body at that time. You would know better than I, but I can see it on their face and in their body. And I know something has clicked, or is at least getting them past whatever that pain point is. And believe me, I've had plenty of clients who can't get there, who have, bravely called, set up appointments, talked with me, had me come into their home, worked through their closet, and they cannot move past their pain points. And what I mean by that is it could be a body image, or there is something that really haunts them about perhaps messages that they grew up believing from their parent or a sibling about how they look or how they dress. There's all sorts of different conditioning that we all struggle with, that we all have had and it had exposure to. And I would say one of the great challenges of my work is whether or not people are really ready to brace or embrace, like we were talking about before, brace for what's coming at them, or embrace the fact that there's some change here and they have to either believe or think differently about themselves than perhaps either they've been conditioned to believe or imprinted on them from childbirth, or there's lots of different things that get in the way. And I've definitely been with clients that can't overcome that. And I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not someone who is there to work through kind of those deeper level, that healing that I truly believe that person likely needed to do. And like I said, there's been multiple clients who I've had that experience with. And so if you find yourself in the midst of that feeling of like that pain point is not moving you forward, I think there's also there's a pause there that needs to happen, and reevaluation. And I'm not saying mental health is necessary in that moment. I don't know, but But oftentimes when I'm working with clients in that space, I can see where the person is receptive and ready to actually take hold of this pain point and do something about it. And I can see when they're not.
Do you usually name that for a client? If you can, I imagine it's a delicate.
Yeah, it's really delicate. It can
thing.
be fragile. I think some clients have been, as even just as I'm talking about, you can imagine this is a really vulnerable space to be with someone, like, especially as you're talking about body and image of body and your self narrative and the self talk. This is why my psychology degree is really helpful and my pastoral skills and like all these things where you're really trying to help people hear and understand how they talk to themselves and what they believe and why this is so. And yeah, there are the occasional people that can really hear that and really value that and appreciate. And then there have been people who cannot hear that. And so perhaps after the appointment, I never heard from them again. And it was their choice. I don't begrudge that. I'm hoping those people are on to the right next step. But
well, and like you were sharing about your townhouse or about the neighbor, we also don't always get to see how all the stories end up.
That's right.
So knowing, it's so interesting as a clinician, having to really approach each patient with, if you are walking in my door, you're here for something, and I'm going to be able to meet that and give whatever is needed.
Yeah.
And when it's time for you to go, then it's time for you to go. And sometimes, and actually most of my clients and my patients are with me for life, which is fascinating because they're continuing to evolve and grow. And okay, how are we optimizing their health? What's interesting though is I've had this experience more than once where someone comes in and we do an intake, we do a full exam, a consultation, then a report of findings where there's all these things. And there's a woman who came to me and literally I'm a pretty straight shooter. So I said in the report, this is what you need to do. These are the dietary changes that need to happen if you want to achieve this outcome that you're looking for. It was particularly with hormone issues. And we're going to do this, this, and this. And she was like, I don't know if I'm ready to do that. I was like, okay. And great that she was transparent. Okay. Like, I don't have any charge or any attachment. My job is to report on, hey, here's what I find. Here's what it will take. Because it's not doing anyone any favors if I'm telling them something that's not true or saying, well, it's going to be easy. You don't have to change anything. So the interesting thing is that same patient came back to me 6 years later and said, Doc, I'm ready. Let's do this. And we made all these changes, and she'd had really challenging periods, and actually got her period back. She was getting a period like if I recall, it was every 90 days. So we got her periods, down to roughly every 30 days or something. And likewise, patients that I actually have never, air quotes, cared for, other than the consultation, exam, report of findings. And then I run into them 4 years later at a coffee shop and say, oh my gosh, Dr. Carrick, it's so great to see you. Do you know when you told me that I really needed to change my diet and shift these 3 things, I did that. I feel so much better. And then I went on, I got my degree in nutrition, blah, blah, blah. And this has literally happened to me. So it's always a good reminder to me, if we don't realize where we contribute, where we touch someone and where we contribute to their transformation, whatever our role in their transformation is or was. And that's not up to me. I can just keep showing up and doing my thing, and doing my thing lovingly, and see, okay, how's that going to happen? I wish that I could be in control of someone. I mean, really what you're talking about, Maria, is someone letting go.
Yeah.
And are they at that point where their gripping and their grasping is fatigued enough, or their motivation for whatever reason, or they can see whatever's on the other side to open up their grasp and their grip and let go of what they had to move forward. And I feel that struggle myself sometimes with looking at my life now and what I have and all the goodness that's there, and having this sense that there's some other things coming towards me, waiting for me, however you want to say that.
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the reasons why I felt passionately about doing this podcast. That I was like, this is a place to tell some stories and to hopefully resonate with some people and maybe inspire, because I don't know, I'd love to know who all is on the other end of this and listening in, but I don't know everyone who is doing that. And so I don't know what nuggets are taken from various conversations, or what wisdom or, pieces of the conversation that could be utilized from someone else. And I really appreciate knowing that in some way I'm contributing to that. I might not ever know where that goes or who's picking that up and taking that into their life. But that's why it felt important for me in this season in particular to be open and honest and fair and clear with you about, here I am, this stylist doing my thing in my work, and I'm blowing up my life, and I'm trying to figure out where vibrancy lives and what that looks like in my life. And I'm doing it alongside a lot of different challenges. And if I can tell you and share with you a little bit about what's happening, maybe you too can find. And I that's why I found you to be such a great conversation partner, because I think we come from that same desire of saying, like, I don't have all the answers, but maybe in my sharing of the story, you get to pick up something and hear it and go, that applies to me. Wonder if am I noticing that, or should I do something about that? And that feels important, to be not the maverick out there, showing the way, but maybe a little bit to help people get more in touch with whatever the wave of change is coming in, is in your life, and to know you're not stuck, to know that you have an option, to know that there's something there that could potentially really shift things for you. And again, I don't have control over it. I don't have control over what's happening in my own life, but I'm an active participant, much like you, in trying to be of service in the world and to help people in that space. But maybe more importantly, to learn how to do that for myself.
And that's really all we can do, is learn to do it for ourselves, and then through story empower, because we're all looking for that connectedness and that relatedness. And that's setting a different model than has been set for us, because we're in such a world of prescription and how to,
Totally.
and this is the way, and if you want to, or let me YouTube that and figure it out. And we're all so individually different, and there's some common threads that we all have. So it's through our relatedness that we actually generate that ongoing transformation that really continues to transform the world, one little bit at a time, or one step at a time, one wave at a time, one choice at a time.
Yeah, and that might be how I want to pose a question then to our audience, because some of this, we wrapped up last time asking about kind of the waves, and where are these waves of change in your life? Like, where is the opportunity, right? So I guess maybe I would pose then for this next kind of session is, what's the story you want to tell? Because I do think there is something really beautiful about all of us taking the time together to maybe tell a little bit of our story. And in that sharing of the story, we get to learn some of these. How did you do it? What worked for you? And were there nuggets or lessons or takeaways there that might inform or help us in our journey? I know I can answer that question for you next time, but I will encourage all of you listening to consider that for yourself. Like, what's the story you want to tell about your life? And if you're feeling stuck, or you're feeling in the thick of change like we are, and we're still sorting it out, to know that story is powerful and you're on a journey, and to trust that journey, because there's more to come there. So we have some good stuff ahead, I'm sure. So Missy, thank you for joining us this episode. It's always a pleasure being with you.
Likewise, thank you. A deep pleasure.
So friends, we will see you very soon. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you've heard, I would appreciate you taking the time to leave a review on the podcasting platform you're using, and share this episode with others who you think might really enjoy these conversations about personal style. For more information all about MFD Style services, you can find me on the web at mfdstyle.com. on Instagram at MFD_style, where I post almost 5 days a week, or send me an email at maria@mfdstyle.com. I also have a weekly email I send to subscribers, so I will include the link to that sign up in the show notes. So until next time, friends, remember to love yourself and then love yourself some more.